Welcome back to AM 590, The Answer. I'm Linda Forsyth, and I am with Cvine News Network. And we're here today with my co-host, which is Leonard Bacani, who is a retired police officer, and he's also one of our volunteer investigative journalists who helps us check out the veracity of the news to make certain it's factual, and also does a little bit of sleuthing on his own and goes on assignment. And here with us today, we have as our guest, Greg Anderson. Greg Anderson was about a year ago on it was May 5th, I believe it was, had conducted a video who was also a police officer and he was on duty at the time. So he conducted a video while he was on duty in his patrol car and had a message that he wanted to get out to fellow law enforcement officers. And that video went viral. It was outstanding. People loved it. And he addressed some very concerning situations that was really beginning to happen at that time. We're going to be placing that video up on our website, c-fine.com. That's c-fine.com, where we have the rest of the news up there that's placed up there every single day. You will want to see that if you haven't seen it. But we have him on today, almost a year later, because now more than ever, it's important that his message get out there, not only to other law enforcement officers, but also to the public in general, to let them know that we have law enforcement officers that love our country and are there to protect the citizens against any enemies, foreign and domestic. They are here for us, and not let information come out that it's just not true. So welcome, Greg. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's talk a little bit about your background before we get into exactly some of this. Why don't you give me a little bit of your background about where you came from, what you've done? Let's hear about
So
that.
I grew up in Snohomish, Washington, which is about 30 minutes north of Seattle. And right when I graduated, went into the military. And I didn't go into the military with like these big patriotic visions. It was more of just a young man that didn't have much direction. And this was in 1999. So it was peacetime military still. But I ended up going into the Ranger Regiment and joining special operations just because I figured if I'm going to do it, why not do something that's difficult and rewarding? And then after 9/11 hit, the story is as it goes. And we were deployed for the better part of the next decade. And I did 14 tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2009, I decided to put that behind me and came back home and became a law enforcement officer in Los Angeles, California. And I was there for about 5 years. And then I transferred up to Seattle and worked for another agency as a police officer up there for about another 4. So, and that brings me up to where I made the video and then was unfortunately terminated as a result. But like I said before we started recording, I stand behind that, and I wouldn't change it if I had the opportunity to.
Greg, can you describe what you said in the video?
Yeah, so the whole premise of my video was to speak to other police officers as a peer. And that's why I felt it was important to do it on duty, in uniform, in my patrol car, because police officers nationwide were being used as the enforcement arm of all of these government mandates that were not legislated into law. It was based on what any specific governor or mayor or city council believed to be the right thing to do. And regardless where you stand on all these COVID restrictions, at the end of the day, we don't have legal authority to go shut people's businesses down or take them into custody for not social distancing. And all, I mean, as a police officer, when you arrest someone or you cite someone, there's very specific documentation that needs to be filled out. You need to cite exactly which law or city code was violated. And a lot of cops were kind of just shooting from the hip, not knowing how they expected us to be the enforcement leg of this. And so I went and talked to my chain of command and I said, just so I can understand where you guys are at on this, what do you expect police officers to do? And they were actually in agreement with me. And so I continued to see officers nationwide, like arresting surfers, arresting moms at the park, not allowing people to sing, forcefully shutting businesses down. But when I would speak to officers face to face, every single cop I knew was appalled at what we were seeing. And my biggest fear was that our profession was going to get a black stain on it, and that the citizens were going to start looking at the profession and at law enforcement officers as the bad guys, even though it was these governors and these mayors that were forcing all this stuff down the community's throats. And so I thought it was important to tell officers, if you don't believe this to be a moral and ethical thing to do, you need to stand up against it. I know nobody wants to rock the boat. I know nobody wants to put themselves in a position where their paycheck may be compromised. But at the end of the day, our citizens that we're sworn to uphold and defend their rights and their liberties, that's more important than your bi-monthly paycheck. And so that message was well received by a lot of police officers, by a lot of citizens, because everybody saw what was taking place. And yeah, like I said, the video got seen probably 100 million times. We got bombarded with supportive emails and messages and texts and whatnot. But here we are a year later, and we're not out of the woods yet. We're still seeing these same things happen. And so obviously that's why we're discussing it today.
Well,
Right.
not only that, you were fired. And if you look back after World War II during the Nuremberg trial, one of the things they made very clear that somebody who said, I was just following orders, that didn't wash.
No,
Those
and it
guys
shouldn't.
went down anyway. And it's
Yeah.
not only with police officers, with doctors and everything else that's going on with COVID. If they're doing things that they know are wrong or not correct,
It falls on you.
that's
Yep,
right.
100%.
The
And here's the
question
thing that I
is it a lawful order?
Yeah, exactly. You got to ask yourself that. And in my opinion, how I interpret it, it's absolutely not a lawful order. I mean, it doesn't matter who in your chain of command, if they're telling you to violate somebody's constitutional rights, it's not only something that you should do, you're absolutely obligated to raise your hand and be like, hey, sir, for these reasons, I'm not willing to follow that order. And I think I wish that more officers would be willing to do that, because look what happened following that. Police officers were painted to be the most evil people in the country for the next 6 months. And it's almost like we're being attacked on multiple fronts. And you know how it is. There's always an ebb and flow between the public's trust in the profession of law enforcement. And depending on what's going on in the media and the political climate, sometimes law enforcement officers are looked in a good light, and then sometimes they're painted to be the most evil human beings on planet Earth. And it's been an uphill battle. And it's sad to see that, like, the profession that was once revered, police officers were once looked to as local heroes. Now so many people are distrustful of them, and just don't look at police officers in a manner that they should be looked at anymore. But I do think a lot of that falls on the profession itself. They need to make it abundantly clear that we side with the community. We're here to support and protect your liberties, not these radical governors' orders and mandates.
Well, mainstream media hasn't been very helpful with you guys,
No,
and plus,
not at
to
all.
try to discredit, do anything they can to throw fuel to the fire, so to speak. I'm sorry, Leonard, were you going to say something?
Oh, Greg, I'm just kind of curious what your state or your department, what justification and what authority were they using? My understanding is, because we talked earlier, that the governor has emergency powers, 30 days, and after the 30 days, it has to be legislated. In other words, there has to be a law, or the law has to be codified,
Correct.
a specific section for the officers to enforce.
That's exactly correct.
Is this order still in place, or are they doing enforcement still to this day?
Well, they continued to just extend the state of emergency, even though it's clearly defined as a 30-day procedure. But you know how convoluted it gets, and people can interpret things differently. And so they just kept reinforcing that, and another 30 days and another 30 days. And then they said they couldn't have a legislator, they couldn't get together because of COVID. So it's pretty convenient that the whole reason why they're able to maintain this state of emergency is for COVID, but we can't legislate it because of COVID. So it just was a perpetual thing that allowed them to continue to enact that. But I don't care what their reasoning is, and I don't care what their justification is. When people are losing their businesses and people are having their rights violated, it's time for people to stand up and say, hey, no, this isn't correct. And I'll tell people this, even if it was legislated, okay, just because there's a law in the books, all you have to do is go back and look through history. A law doesn't mean it's moral or ethical. There's been a lot of laws throughout history that were enforcing segregation.
Right.
And you know, I mean, like we could go back and look at 100 things and look at different laws and say that's not a moral or ethical procedure to follow. And it's the same thing here. So I told people, I said, you know, it's interesting that they're not legislating things, but even if they were, I'm not going to go shut people's businesses down. It's not going to happen.
Well, you know what? One of the things that you mentioned when we were discussing earlier is like when there were the Antifa riots, because they aren't called that. What are they? Rallies? Antifa rallies or whichever, where they were punching people and causing all sorts of problems that were violent and destroying businesses and so on. That a lot of the police officers were told to stand down.
Yes.
And why don't you talk a little bit about that with the orders from the top?
Well, Seattle, just like many liberal cities, I mean, it's no secret. They were being burned to the ground last summer by Antifa and these radical BLM movements. And the officers that were going to respond were basically told to be a show of force. Like you can go out there and you can have your riot gear on and you can hold the line all the while people are throwing bricks and Molotov cocktails at you. But if you do anything, if you implement any type of use of force, they're going to come after you. And the reason that they're doing that is because all of these radical leftists were using that as an opportunity to paint police officers out to be the bad guys. Like I had one friend who was told, clear the freeways, get the people off the freeways. And so, and he had his leg broken that day by a brick. Okay. He had his shin fractured that same day. He went out to the freeway and he maced the people that were blocking the roads. And then he got fired and is being criminally charged. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And that's why I wouldn't be part of this profession anymore. I don't care if the salary was $1 million a year. The higher up in most of these police departments, the police chiefs are politicians themselves. And instead of looking out for their officers and doing what's best for them, they're just going to follow whatever the radical political agenda is. At least that's what we kept seeing over and over in Seattle. So.
Well, when you go back again to Germany, it was kind of similar in some ways where, you know, they were asked to do some things. And I think there were a few that decided to get out of the profession and they were replaced with what? Brown shirts.
Yes, men.
And
Yep.
so with that being said, you know, with the good cops leaving because of what's going on, because of their morals and their ethics, are starting to be replaced with those who are willing to be rather questionable with our constitutional rights.
I agree. And
So
we're seeing
what do
that
we do?
even in the hiring process these days.
Mhm.
The people that they're bringing on to the profession are not strong-willed people that are willing to stand up and fight for what they believe is right. It's a bunch of people that just fall in line and nod their head and say, yes, sir. And it's sad. It's sad to me because I feel like I talk about this on my podcast a lot. The least capable of our society, meaning these political elite that have never served in the military, they don't focus on capabilities. They don't focus on health and fitness. But for some strange reason, they've worked themselves into a position of power where they're calling the shots. And all of the police officers that are falling in line with it, it's mind-boggling to me. Like I wouldn't put my hands on a mom in the park for, I don't care how much you pay me or what you threaten me with. It's a simple matter of right versus wrong. And the bizarre thing about it is we're seeing it happen worldwide. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen what's been happening in Canada you
Mhm.
know, in Australia and the UK. And it's like, it's this big government power grab where they think they're in charge of everybody. And nothing could be further from the truth. This government wasn't enacted to be in charge of us or dictate our lives or tell us what to do. That's the opposite of the American spirit. And so I feel like just inside of a year, everybody's willing to just lay down, follow their government's orders, and not push back. And that's not what being American is. We're supposed to push back against this kind of stuff.
By doing rallies or, I don't know, voting. But then again, well, let's not go there. Uh,
Yeah.
but when you're talking about worldwide, it is scary. We've got many friends all over the world, and people contacting Seavine, showing police officers arresting people in Australia, walking down the street without a mask and
Yeah.
forcefully shoving them to the ground. Same thing in Europe, same
Yep.
thing in Canada. In fact, we just saw on a video a pastor that everyone was kind of cheering him on
Yeah. I
in
love that. I love that
Calgary,
video.
Canada, that quite a few police officers came in force to shut down a church service during Passover, during the middle of the service.
So what are
And
those police officers doing? Every single police officer in that room knows this is stupid. I shouldn't be here. This isn't part of my duties and my legal obligations, but we're seeing it over and over and over. And the whole reason that I was motivated to make the video is because I figured it's only going to be a matter of time before a group of cops comes into somebody's house to shut down Thanksgiving dinner and they get shot. Like I was fearful that the American public was going to turn on the profession simply because we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be illegally arrested. And to this day, I still think that day may be coming. And that's why I implore officers, you got to decide like what makes sense to you as an individual, as a human being, like what's moral and ethical in your heart. And if you don't feel like the things that you're being asked to do fall into those two categories, you're obligated to say, you know what, I'm unwilling to follow this order and I'm not going to take this directive. And the scary thing about everything that we're seeing is if everybody would be defiant together, if there was mass defiance, this whole thing would be over in 10 minutes. But everybody's afraid to be defiant to the government, and I can't understand why.
and I think if more people came together and were defiant, it isn't just one person, although one person has done these types of things in the past that help to set the pace to bring more people on. But you're right. It's going to be a matter of people just saying no more,
No
no
more.
more.
Like, I'm not wearing your mask. I'm not social distancing. I'm going to have my family over for dinner. My business is open. And like I told you before we started recording, my business is open. And I have been defying the governor's orders for going on a year now. And by the grace of God, no one's come and tried to shut me down. And I've seen videos, 1,000 of them, of, some person from the health commission with 6 police officers, just like that video of the church, walk in and say, oh, hey, you got to shut down. And if you don't, we're going to detain you. All this crazy stuff we're seeing. People need to be willing to fight back against that. And I know that some people don't think that that's a popular opinion, but nobody, including the government, including police officers, have the right to take away your civil liberties. They don't have the right to do that. And so I've arrived at the point where if a police officer does try and shut my business down, okay, we're going to have a problem and I'm going to absolutely refuse. And if they want to use force against me, then that's the direction that they're going to have to take it. But we can't just continue to sit back and allow these kind of things to take place in our communities. It's up to us as both citizens and law enforcement officers to say, you know what, we're done with this stuff. And again, it would be over in 10 minutes if we did that.
We are in a type of war, but the thing is, it's the everyday person, the everyday police officer. That's the ones on the front lines. I mean, we're not trained to do this. We'd hire the police officers and the military to basically fight for us. But this is taking it onto our soil, onto our homes, into our families, into our churches, into our businesses,
Yeah.
everywhere.
And
It,
if you
it's
don't think that there's some like a nefarious agenda going on at this point, I don't think you're being open or honest with yourself. I don't think your eyes are open. This has been the craziest year of our entire lives. And I talked to like my papa who's in his almost nearly 80. He says the same thing. Like this is the craziest period of time he's ever seen in his entire life. And to go back to what you're saying, like we need to unite as a people. And if you look at what they're doing with the media, like gay people hate straight people and black people hate white people and conservatives hate liberals. And it's all of this government pushed agenda and media driven hype that makes us all think we hate each other. And in my personal experience, I'm 40. Okay. I'm not that old, but I have a decent amount of experience under my belt. A lot of the stuff that they push, the narratives that are being spewed are simply not true. They're simply not true. Like I have yet to meet the police officer that says, "Hey, let's go pull that car over. There was two black guys in it." Like I've never even heard anything like that in my entire life. But if you watch the media, every single police officer is a racist. And what that does is it starts to influence the youth's opinion on who we are. And now they start to harbor these resentments and these ideologies of what a police officer is. And it's all a lie and it's all a media driven narrative. And it's sad to see, but we're being pitted against each other. And it's time for us to realize that that's what's happening, in my opinion.
No, and it's an excellent opinion. You're right on target. And that's a perfect place to pause for a minute for a station break. And we will be right back with Greg Anderson and Leonard Bacani and myself, Linda Forsythe. We have more to discuss. Welcome back to AM 590, The Answer. This is Linda Forsythe with CVI News Network, here with my co-host, Leonard Bacani, and our guest today, Greg Anderson, and having an outstanding discussion. Our last segment discussed about the various different things of what law officers are being requested to do that aren't necessarily constitutional and causing all kinds of problems, especially this last year. Now, Greg, as we move forward again in our conversation, why don't you finish what you were saying about what we need to do to be able to stand up against this?
In my opinion, I mean, it was 15 days to flatten the curve, right? Here we are a year later and still being asked to keep your business shut down, or restaurants have to only have 25% capacity. All of these things that government is asking people to do are asinine. And the reason that they can ask asinine things of people is because none of those people are grounded in reality, that understand how to run business and how finances work and how payroll works. And so the only option, in my opinion, at this point is mass defiance on every level, both citizens and police officers telling the government, we're not your henchmen. And for citizens, you're not my dad, you're not my parents. You don't have authority over me to tell me how many people can be in my business or to tell me how many family members can come over for Thanksgiving. We're done with this. And by being done with this means we're not going to accept it anymore. And if you try and force it down our throats anymore, then at some point, the resistance is going to have to become an actual physical, real resistance. And I know that people are very reluctant to say that, but that's what our country is founded on. That is exactly how America came into existence, is we were done dealing with tyranny. And if you look at what's happening politically, it's just as bad as it was back then, you know? And so I think at some point the government needs to take a back seat and realize they don't hold the power. That's not the structure of the United States of America. The people hold the power. Once they realize that, they're gonna be forced to sit down and stop all this nonsense. But if you look at what's happening, first all the COVID stuff, and now what are they going after this week? Guns, guns, guns. Like they're taking executive action against guns. the writing's on the wall. If your eyes are open, it's crystal clear what's happening. They're trying to take the power away from the people and continuously put it back into the hands of the government. And again, the gun thing is something I'm unwilling to move 1 inch on. Like, I have lots of guns and I'm not going to register them, and I'm not going to allow them to go into some federal database. Nobody's seizing them from me. And if that means that I have to lose my life, then so be it. But if more people share that opinion, the government doesn't have the power that it has. The government has the power that it has because it keeps people in a state of fear. Once you can overcome that fear, then you're free. And that's the scariest thing for them. They don't want people to be free thinking people. They want them to be sheep that are controlled through fear.
And that's we, the people, are, like you said, are the ones in charge. We're the ones that put them in office. It's like you having a business and you have an employee, and the employee decides that, okay, I want to own the business now, and you get
Yeah.
out.
No,
And
it's exactly,
it's my business, and I'm going to take the money too. And you can't say anything about it. Leave.
well, and here's the other thing that's just mind-boggling about our government is all of the relief packages and the stimulus money. And it's like they're acting like, oh, we should be grateful and thankful to them. That's our money.
Yeah.
They don't earn any money. They don't generate any revenue. They take our money and then make us feel like we should be thankful that they gave us some of it back. Everything's so backwards right now that, to tell you the truth, I think we do need a reset. Maybe a reset would be good for this country, because I can tell you, someone that's been in the special operations community, I've lived all over the world. I've lived in a lot of third world countries, war-torn countries. The places where the people have it the hardest, a lot of times, are the happiest. And that's because their life is full of adversity and they're going through hardships on a day-to-day basis. I think America has become this utopia where, since World War II, life's been good. Everybody's happy. And we haven't really faced the types of challenges that I think are needed to grow and stay strong and have a good sense of community. So, I mean, who knows where this will go, but it's strange times we're coming upon.
Yes, it is. Leonard just found something from Lynn Wood that he wanted to bring out.
Right. And it goes along to what we're saying. He says, I preface my comments by reminding all that you have the right to make your own decisions and choices. I only urge you that you make your choices with knowledge, wisdom, and discernment. In my opinion, government mandated masks, vaccines, and vaccine passports are unconstitutional. The government cannot take away your Bill of Rights because we are not granted those rights by the government. The Bill of Rights simply recognizes fundamental human rights which are bestowed upon us by God. Government cannot take away or deny us rights which government did not give us. Lawfully resist, including non-violent civil disobedience, any effort by the government or entities engaged in interstate commerce to deprive you of your God-given human rights. It goes along with what we were saying.
Yeah. And I mean,
Outstanding.
what does lawfully resist mean? Assemble, protest,
Right.
vote people into power that should be there, vote people out of power that shouldn't be there. But also, at some point, when the system appears to be broken, like it does, there reaches a point when we have to say we've had enough. And I think we're going to see that, and sometime in the near future. It kind of excites me, actually.
Well, let's talk a little bit. So some of the people that are listening that are not law enforcement officers and that can understand exactly what their constitutional rights are, because unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't know. So from a law enforcement officer point of view, and I'm actually going to have these questions to both of you, both Leonard and to Greg. We'll start out with Greg. When do you read the Miranda Rights, and when does somebody who's having the Miranda Rights read to them, what do they need to know?
So I would always tell anybody that's being questioned by the police, don't say anything. Say the word lawyer, and now you can't be questioned any longer. But Miranda rights are something that a lot of people have a misconception of. So there's 3 tiers that need to be met for someone to be read their Miranda rights. It has to be somebody acting on behalf of the United States government. So a police officer in most instances, right? Then you have to be in some sort of custody, meaning you're not free to go. All right. So a police officer has now detained. You're no longer free to go. And I'm asking you questions, right? So those three tiers have to be met. Like they teach in the police academy: cops, questioning, custody. When those three things are met, I have to read someone their Miranda rights. But there's been plenty of times when I've served like arrest warrants on people. I don't read them Miranda because I have no questions of them. I've identified you as a person who has a warrant for your arrest. You're in handcuffs and now you're going to jail. And it's as simple as that. And so the whole thing of Miranda became law because once you're continuing to investigate something, meaning questioning this person about the incident that took place, now that person has a right to know, well, I don't have to tell these police officers anything. I actually have a right to sit down with an attorney and know what my legal rights are. And so, and a lot of people that don't know that prior to Miranda felt that they do have to tell the police whatever they're asking, or sometimes they feel compelled to tell the police. And so, yeah, you don't have to tell me. As a former cop, I've always thought if it ever gets to the point where I'm on the other side of things, I'm not saying anything, nothing. So that's my professional advice.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, Fourth Amendment, Leonard.
Well, the Fourth Amendment is protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The police officer must have probable cause to arrest, probable cause to seize both your persons and properties. Without probable cause, they can't do all that. So there is another standard, which is a lesser standard, and that's reasonable suspicion. A police officer can contact you and detain you based on his experience, training, and knowledge and expertise in a particular area. He can detain you if he has reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So those are the two standards that police officers are obligated to obey or comply with.
Okay, so is there anything there then that the layperson needs to understand when that is being breached?
Yes. So, I mean, for instance, reasonable suspicion. Say I'm on patrol and I get a call that this bank just got robbed on the corner of 5th and Union, and the suspect was running out with red shoes and a yellow sweater. I'm 3 blocks away and I see a guy with red shoes and a yellow sweater. I have legal authority to stop and detain that guy. Now, that guy may have had no involvement in the crime. He may be a private citizen who's on a lunch break, and now he's in handcuffs. And you can see where that starts to get people they feel like their rights are being violated, but you have to understand it from the other side, is that police officers have to have this as an investigatory tool to be able to stop, question, put the pieces together, and try and figure out who committed the crime. And guess what? Sometimes the person you detained is 100% innocent. And I'll even take it another notch. Sometimes the people you arrest, just because you have probable cause, remember, the only time someone is determined to be guilty of a crime is beyond a reasonable doubt. That takes place in a court of law. The patrol level officer, our standard to put somebody into handcuffs and take them into custody is that you believed it's more likely than not that they committed the crime. So, it's hard to put a percentage on it, but sometimes they say, if it's 51% that you think they committed this crime based on, suspect or witness statements or video footage, whatever it may be, you have a right to take that person into custody, and then they'll have their day in court to determine their guilt.
It's called the totality of the circumstances. It may not, one little factor may not be enough to justify an arrest or seizure. However, given the totality of the circumstances, everything that the officer knows and understands, you put it all together, and would a reasonable officer come up with the same conclusion?
Okay, outstanding. Now, let's say somebody comes knocking at your door and they want to come in, they have, whatever it is. Let's yeah, an excellent example was that church where that pastor asked, do you have a warrant? And they didn't. So is that the same with a home? Somebody comes knocking on your door and you're congregated around the Thanksgiving table.
Yes.
And they want to come in because they suspect there's guns in there or whatever.
Yeah. If they don't have a warrant to enter your home, then they do not get to enter your home, period. Now, there are what are called exigent circumstances. So under exigency, a police officer may enter your home without a warrant, and that's sometimes it's community caretaking. Let's say someone was having a heart attack inside and someone notified a cop. You can run in there and start giving somebody CPR, right? Or let's say a violent crime is happening in real time and it's brought to your attention that, hey, someone's being raped in a bedroom. You can enter that room without a warrant because you have what's called exigency. Without exigency, you absolutely cannot go into that house without a warrant. And so it's just like anything in American politics. They start to use the word exigency and to try and determine, well, can we get in under exigency with this? Can we get in under exigency with that? And it starts to become kind of convoluted. But I would say, shy of exigency, if someone's trying to come into your house, do exactly what that pastor did. Get out. I'm not answering your questions. I'm not talking to you. Come back with a warrant. No, I love that video.
That was great. There was something that happened to me quite a few years ago, and I'm going to bring it up here. I was working as a nurse in Virginia, and I had about like a 20-minute drive out in the middle of nowhere before I got there. And there was a police officer that was trying to pull me over, that there was no way this was a cop. The lights were all weird. It just, there wasn't, I was very suspicious that it was not a police officer. I was out in the middle of nowhere and somebody was trying to pull me over in the dark.
Uh-huh.
So in situations like that, number one, what are the rights of an individual where you genuinely suspect something isn't okay and you're kind of in a dangerous situation or just something like that? What are an individual's rights?
So here's the thing. If you're on a public roadway, if you look at the back of your license, like you have an agreement with the government that you will follow the laws and rules of the roadway. And if you don't, then a law enforcement officer does have the right to pull you over and that you will comply with that officer's request to pull you over. So if you are doing something that violates the law, then a police officer does have a right to conduct a traffic stop. But with that said, I've heard situations like you mentioned before where people just don't believe it's an actual police officer. My best advice in a circumstance like that, literally call 911 and say, hey, I'm being pulled over. I'm northbound on this road for A, B, and C reasons. I don't believe this is a police officer. And that way you're showing right away that I'm not trying to be defiant. I'm not trying to outrun the police. I have a legitimate concern of who this person is. And I think that, I mean, that's a very rare occasion, I'm sure, but I've had that question before. So just be open and upfront about it. But if you just decide, you know what, that doesn't look like a cop car, so I'm not going to stop for 20 miles and it is a police officer, there's a good chance that doesn't help your case in court at all, So be open and upfront about it. Or sometimes, I have people say like, I don't feel comfortable stopping on some county road, so I'm going to stop at the first gas station that's a well-lit area where there's other people present, or those kind of things. But just know if you start running from the police, things can get escalated quickly. So be transparent about it.
Well, this was a fake cop car, by the way. And
Okay.
it was in the late 80s where I did not have a cell phone on me.
Yeah.
Uh, so I did not pull over. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I figured I had a better chance staying in my car. But that being said, I hear what you're saying, but it's good for people to know what they can and can't do. So in other words, have your phone on you. Leonard, what about the Fifth Amendment?
Well, the Fifth Amendment, we talked about that. That relates to Miranda, your right to not be able to incriminate yourself. In other words, when you get stopped by a police officer and The officer is obligated to remind you or inform you or advise you that you have the right to remain silent and that anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Now, and then you have a decision to make. Do I talk to this officer and waive my rights, uh, or do I not talk to him, which is my right? That's your decision. But as far as Fifth Amendment, Miranda, we talked about it. The officer, like Greg said, your rights are not violated just because the officer does not read you Miranda rights. He has to advise you of your Miranda rights only if he wants to talk to you. So if he decides not to talk to you or doesn't want to talk to you or doesn't need to, then he doesn't have to, and it's not violating your rights.
Okay, oh, we're pretty close here to the end of our show. I would like to take the last 5-7 minutes here that we have going on to discuss what your original video was about, Greg. And let's go back and address fellow law enforcement officers. Let's give your plea, say your piece about where things are going to be headed if they continue as is.
Again, I just think that it's imperative for the most capable people of our society, and that is our veterans and our police officers. The most capable people in our country need to be on the side of right and stand up for what is moral and what is ethical. And if you're ever asked to do something, this is what I always tell people: integrity, you know immediately what the correct answer is. And if you're on patrol and you're asked to go into a church because they're not supposed to be, the governor doesn't want them singing, you know what the answer is in your heart. And police officers have to be willing to stand behind that. And I know that that puts people in a predicament because we're all slave to our paycheck to a certain extent. And we all have our bills and our mortgages and kids to feed and all that stuff. But we have to put our moral integrity above all that stuff. And again, once everybody arrives at the same conclusion that we're done doing this stuff, the problem will end as quickly as it began. And I honestly think that citizens and police officers together have to be willing to defy all of these things that we know are agenda driven. And once they don't have the enforcement arm of pushing this agenda anymore, then they're done. You know, it's going to be a toothless tiger. So we'll see where it goes, because it's easy to sit here and say this, and most cops that I know are in agreement with me. But at the same time, we keep seeing these things happen because in the heat of the moment, hey, they get dispatched and they're here and their sergeant's telling them to do this. And you can see it in their eyes. A lot of the cops that are in these videos, they don't want to be doing what they're doing, but they're just kind of caught up in the moment. So in the military, we call it wargaming. Think about what you may go through. Think about what's going to be asked of you. Think about the expectations that people are going to place on you, and kind of run those scenarios through your mind. And that way, when you're confronted with it, you know where you stand and you know exactly where you're going to take this. Sorry, that was mine.
I was going to, what am I having going off? I told both of you to shut everything off. Greg, that was awesome. Awesome.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what we need to do is I request, because we are going to, even though AM 590, you're not going to be able to see any of us on the video, we are putting this show on video. So you can see it on our website at c-vine.com, along with Greg's video that he did last May. I strongly recommend you take the time to watch it. Greg, do you have any place that you would like to send people because of things that you have going on? Do you have a book? Do you have what's the deal?
Right now I have my podcast. It's called Endless Endeavor, and it's on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all the big podcasting hubs. And other than that, I have my Ju Jitsu Academy outside of Seattle. So if you're local to that area, come train. But yeah, go check out the podcast. It's been doing really well. it's a little more brash than this. And there's some foul language, and if that hurts your feelings, we might not be the show for you. But yeah, people have really been enjoying that show.
Outstanding. And I am going to take this opportunity on air to say, you need to be a Seavine citizen journalist to help us with investigating and stand with all your other brothers and sisters that, retire law enforcement or whatever, because this is how we're going to change things.
Yes.
The health field has the frontline doctors. Well, okay, let's do something here with law enforcement, that people who love our country, that are not extremists, they're just citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Greg.
Thanks for having me.
Come back at our next show. We're going to be bringing on Chad Bianco, who is the sheriff of Riverside County in California. And he's on the same page as all of us here. Great guy. So good day, everybody. We'll see you next week.